250,000 people seeking a fresh start every year, looking for new opportunities, interests, families. What other place suitable to sustain this other than our home and native land? This is immigration in Canada. Now, let's just rewind back exactly 190 years into the history of Canadian immigration. Good times. When Canada first started to prosper and not a single foreign immigrant was allowed through the borders. Let's start with one of the first events. The year is 1828. Britain passed the first legislative recognition that was responsible for the safety and well-being of immigrants leaving British Isles. The initial effect meant to be implicated was to regulate the carrying of passengers in merchant vessels. This limited number of passengers who could be carried on a ship was regulated as well as the amount of space allocated to them, and required that passengers to be supplied with adequate sustenance on the voyage. Fast forward 57 years and we got the Chinese head tax. Created in 1885 after Canada passed the Chinese Immigration Act, the Chinese head tax was a fixed fee forced onto any Chinese immigrant entering Canada. Come on! What Canada really wanted to do was repress the amount of Chinese entering Canada after the successful completion of the Canadian Pacific Railway. The tax was eventually put out by the Chinese Immigration Act of 1923, and this stopped all Chinese immigration except for mostly clergy, business people, educators, and students. Fast forward 29 years, and later came the Komagata Maru incident in date May 23, 1914. A Japanese steamship arrived in Vancouver coming from Hong Kong, China. It carried 376 passengers from Punjab, which is in India. Only 20 passengers were allowed to stay in Canada, and the others were forced to go back to India. As you can tell, we weren't exactly on everyone come stay here, it's free terms with the rest of the world. To expand on the opportunities and new beginnings that foreigners get from immigrating, we've brought in city-famous political expert Benjamin Dover. Good evening, sir. Good evening, Mr. Dover. How are you? I'm good, sir. What about you? I'm doing splendid, thank you. Oh, that's good. It is, yeah. Yeah, so one of the main reasons foreigners immigrate here is for job opportunities and trade deals. But the thing about that is that high-paid and higher-level employment offerings are mostly given to experienced and educated immigrants, leaving the rest behind to more subordinate jobs. And I guess the second reason that most people have for immigration is a fresh start. In general, people are just looking for a new life, and what better place to do it than Canada? Just welcomes all the more people and encourages a plethora of people to immigrate. Now, Canada actually has a lot to gain from immigration too. One thing is that Canada would become more used to immigrants and their reputation would positively increase. Recognition would spread throughout the provinces, welcoming more foreigners into a positive environment. Also, nowadays we all know how almost every school and university has students from all around the world. Well, that just shows the variety of immigrants Canada now has, and these students benefit from our universities. And if they decide to stay, they prove to be advantageous to the Canadian industry. Well, thanks for the insight on that, Mr. Dover. I guess we'll see you next time. Yes, we will. Yeah, have a nice day, Mr. Dover. Yeah, you too, sir. Yep. Yeah. Anyways, now we have 1995 immigrant from Kashmir, Pakistan, Jaswinder Windersaj. Good day, sir. Good day, Jess. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience as an immigrant and what you had to go through when you came here?
Yes, well, I remember all the challenges and difficulties my friends and I had to face to get here. I came here with my squad. Good times.
I see.
The first thing we did was take this quiz of eligibility. One of my buddies got a whopping 56 out of 100. Unfortunately, you need at least a 67 out of 100, so he wasn't allowed to come. But given my insane smartness, I scored an admirable 69 out of 100. All my friends got 68. I know, impressive. But anyways, I came here and I was told to follow a set of guidelines and regulations to stay here in Canada. My friends were told the same. Also, my one Aboriginal friend who had been living here had already told me about his troubles with housing in his community. Employment and education and healthcare difficulties too. The government wasn't really acting upon this, but they eventually came to an agreement and decided to grant Aboriginals the right they were missing. Now, since Canada looks for more experienced and educated immigrants for jobs, a lot of First Nations were left in the dark and foreigners like me got the job I was looking for. My friends had only found lowercase jobs due to their lack of education and work experience. I also remember how a lot of us were not granted some services that were given to others since we were immigrants.
Yes, of course.
Also, another challenge that I think all foreigners at the time had dealt with was racism and discrimination. Which isn't a big deal now, but at the time we were dealt with poorly and treated as inferior.
I'm sorry to hear that, Just, but sadly that's all the time we had today here to talk with you. Thank you so much for dropping by.
Oh, my pleasure, sir.
Alright, well, now we're gonna talk a little bit about what Canada's policies are and how they've decided to approach the problems. So, previous immigrants and low-skilled native-born workers tend to experience negative impacts, while more educated residents benefit from increased migration. Neither of these effects is large. This changed the acceptance rates since 1885, when barely any foreigners were allowed in Canada. Due to acknowledgement of immigration issues in 1985, the Singh decision gave rights to refugees in Canada without having to be Canadian citizens. The Immigration Act was put into action in 1978. This act gave more power to the provinces to create and set their own immigration laws. Canada also came up with the Canada-Quebec Accord, which was signed in 1991. Basically, Quebec can nominate the percentage of immigrants to Canada that corresponds to its population within Canada. It also allows Quebec to require immigrants who settle in Quebec to send their children to French language schools. Under the Accord, Quebec seeks immigrants whose first language is French. Every year, about 75% of French-speaking immigrants come to Canada to settle in Quebec. Overall, more non-Francophone immigrants settle in Quebec than Francophone immigrants. So, immigration has changed a whole lot? Crazy how back then we barely let anyone in, and if they were let in, it was with a price. Now Canada is practically known for being so multicultural in the immigratory aspect. Who knows how immigration will be in the future? Only time will tell.